I didn't expect to wake up that morning and have my own family betray me. But here we are. For weeks, my parents have been going on and on about this family vacation, a once in a lifetime getaway. White sandy beaches, luxury resorts, and endless buffets. They planned it, picked the location, set the dates, everything. All I had to do was show up. And I did. I took time off work, packed my bags, and double-checked my travel documents. I lived in a different city from them, but it wasn't an issue. There was an airport here, and I was supposed to fly out and meet them at the resort. No complications. No reason to worry. Until I got to the airport. Check-in was supposed to be routine. I walked up to the counter, handed over my passport, and waited. The agent frowned, typed something, then typed again before looking at me with an expression. I couldn't quite read. "Sir, your ticket was canceled." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She hesitated, as if bracing for my reaction. "It was canceled yesterday. There's no reservation under your name. That had to be a mistake." My parents and I had literally discussed this trip 3 days ago. Everything was fine. I had booked this ticket weeks ago. I pulled out my phone and called my parents. No answer. My brother? Nothing. My sister? Silence. Then, just as I was about to try again, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Hope you enjoy your taxi ride home, loser." I stared at the screen. Was this some kind of joke? A typo? Maybe they meant to send it to someone else? But no. The longer I stood there, the clearer it became. They had done this on purpose. They had invited me on this trip, let me rearrange my entire schedule, and then, at the last second, canceled my flight behind my back. And then they had the audacity to laugh about it. At first, I wasn't even mad, just shocked. I stood there, surrounded by people moving through the airport, dragging their luggage, checking in for flights they were actually allowed to board, while I was left stranded. It was humiliating. And then, humiliation turned into something else. This wasn't just a prank. This wasn't harmless fun. This was my family. The same family that had no issue calling me whenever they needed financial help. The same family that expected me to take care of them without question. My sister's tuition? I paid for most of it. My brother's wedding? He counted on me to cover a huge chunk. My parents? I had bailed them out more times than I could count. And this is how they treated me? Like I was disposable? A joke? I exhaled slowly. Fine, fine. They thought this was funny. They thought I would be upset, maybe beg for an explanation, maybe even forgive them and move on. They had no idea what they had just done. I turned around, walked out of the airport, and got into a cab. The ride home was silent, but my mind wasn't. They had just given me a whole week of free time. A whole week to think, to plan, to act. They thought they were playing a game. They had no idea I was about to change the rules. Because one thing about me, I don't get mad. I get even. The cab ride home was quiet, but my mind was racing. I kept replaying the moment at the airport, the canceled ticket, the smug little text from my mother, the fact that not one of them had picked up my calls. They really thought they had pulled off the ultimate joke, left me stranded like an idiot while they flew off to paradise. But what they didn't realize? They had just given me a whole week to think about exactly how I was going to make them regret it. I wasn't the kind of person who got angry and lashed out. No, I preferred something more strategic, more memorable. By the time I stepped into my apartment, I knew exactly where to start. First, the money. I wasn't some billionaire, but I was the one they all turned to when things got tight. My sister's tuition? I covered a huge chunk. My brother's wedding? He counted on me to fund most of it. My parents? They had a joint account they constantly dipped into, which, surprise, I had been quietly refilling for years. They had gotten so comfortable with my generosity that they never once considered what would happen if I stopped. So I did. The first thing I did was log into my banking app and start cutting them off, one by one. My sister's automatic tuition payments? Canceled. The money I had set aside for my brother's wedding expenses? Locked away. The emergency fund my parents loved using for anything but emergencies? Gone. Then I sat back and waited. The first few days, there was nothing. They were too busy sipping cocktails and pretending I didn't exist. But on the 5th day, the cracks started to show. The first message came from my sister. "Hey, can you send the tuition money? It's due in a few days." I could almost feel her confidence in the text. She wasn't asking if I could help. She was expecting it. I replied, "Ask mom and dad." A few minutes passed. "Then what do you mean?" I smiled. "I'm not paying for it anymore. You'll have to come up with something else." Nothing. Silence. I could imagine her staring at her phone, confused, maybe even calling our parents. Maybe they were already realizing something was wrong. And then, the next morning, my brother reached out. "Hey man, I need to talk to you about the wedding budget. Let's meet this weekend." I didn't bother with a slow build-up like I had with my sister. "I'm not paying for anything. Figure it out." His response was instant. "What?" I didn't explain. Let him sit with it. Let him panic. By the time my parents landed, they must have known something was up. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just waited. I knew exactly how this would play out. They'd get home, settle in, and then, when reality hit, that's when the real chaos would begin. And I was right. By noon, my phone started to explode. First, my sister, mom, and dad said they don't have the money for my tuition. WTF is going on? I let her sit with that for a bit. Then my brother, dude, I just talked to mom. She said you're refusing to pay for the wedding. What the hell? I actually laughed. Oh, so now they were all talking? Amazing how quickly they could communicate when money was involved. I finally decided to answer. "Yeah, I'm not paying for anything anymore. Hope you had a nice vacation, though." Silence. Then my sister again. "What are you talking about? You literally promised to help." "Yes. And mom and dad literally promised me a vacation." Things change. That's when my parents finally stepped in. My dad called first. I let it ring. My mom called next. Ignored. Then came the messages. "Mom, what are you doing? Call me now." "Dad, enough with the attitude. We need to talk." I let them sweat. An hour later, my brother showed up at my door. I opened it, leaning against the frame like I wasn't in the middle of completely destroying their expectations. He already looked annoyed. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," I said simply. He ran a hand through his hair. "Okay, look, I don't know what happened, but this is bigger than some holiday drama. My wedding is in 3 months, man." I raised an eyebrow. "So, you said you'd help." "I already told people we had the money covered." I shrugged. "Not my problem." His jaw clenched. "Come on, man, don't do this just because mom and dad pissed you off." That made me laugh. Pissed me off? They stranded me at an airport and laughed about it. They planned it. And you were okay with it. He hesitated. "I didn't know they were going to do that." "But you thought it was funny when they told you, right?" Silence. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "That's what I thought." He tried again. "Kurt, seriously, what am I supposed to do?" I smiled. "Take a cab home, loser." And I slammed the door in his face. I barely had time to enjoy that moment before my phone started ringing again. My mom. I let it ring. My dad. Ignored. My sister. Declined. They had no idea what to do without me. And that was exactly the point. I barely had time to process slamming the door in my brother's face before the real storm hit. For the first time in years, my family was facing a problem they couldn't throw onto my plate. Their free ride was officially over, and they were spiraling. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Mom, Kurt, enough with the games. Call me. Dad, this isn't funny. We need to talk now." "Sister, you're ruining my life over a stupid vacation?" "Brother, you're seriously making me look bad in front of my in-laws, man." They were scrambling. And I loved it. I ignored them all. I wanted them to feel the weight of my absence. Let them sit with their choices. Let them feel exactly what I felt when they left me stranded, laughing behind my back. Then, finally, the message I had been waiting for arrived. 0 available balance. Their joint bank account was dry, the one they used for everything: groceries, bills, gas. The same account I had been quietly depositing money into for years. I had known they relied on it. What I didn't know was just how much, because it took them less than a day to run out. And that's when the calls changed. "Mom, there must be some mistake. The bank says we have nothing left. Can you send something now?" "Dad, Kurt, pick up. This is serious." I let them panic for a while before answering. "I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you should have thought about that before canceling my ticket." For the first time, my mom didn't text back. She called. I picked up. "Kurt, what is wrong with you? We just got back from vacation and now you're acting crazy." Your brother's wedding? Your sister's school? Do you even care about this family? I smirked. That's funny. I wondered the same thing when you left me at the airport. She scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. It was a joke. You seriously can't be holding a grudge over that. Sure, I am. Before she could respond, my dad cut in. Son, be reasonable. We need your help. I leaned back in my chair. Yeah, well, I needed a flight. Guess we're all out of luck. My mom let out a sharp breath. Kurt, we already spent a lot of money on this trip. We didn't think it'd be a problem. We just assumed you'd help us out, like you always do. And there it was. We assumed you'd help. They weren't sorry. They didn't regret what they did. They just assumed I'd keep giving, keep bailing them out. I let out a short laugh. Well, you assumed wrong. Kurt, stop being selfish. My mother snapped. Oh, that almost set me off. Selfish? I had carried them for years, paid for things they never even had to think about. And now that the free ride was over, I was the selfish one? I took a breath. You know what? Let's talk in person. I'll see you tonight. I hung up before they could answer. That evening, I pulled up to my parents' house right on time. The second I parked, the front door swung open. My dad stood there, arms crossed. My mom hovered behind him. My sister sat on the couch, arms folded. My brother leaned against the wall, looking equally pissed. A real family reunion. I walked in and sat at the dining table like I wasn't the most hated person in the room. Dad spoke first. All right, Kurt. Enough games. What is going on? I shrugged. I don't know. You tell me. Last time we talked, I was supposed to be on a flight. Now, suddenly, I'm your financial lifeline. Crazy how things change. Mom let out an annoyed sigh. Oh my God, it was a joke. Are you really dragging this out over some harmless prank? I smiled. Funny how it's a joke when you do it, but when I cut you off, it's a crisis. My brother jumped in. Okay, but you're screwing all of us now. This isn't just about mom and dad. My wedding is in 3 months. You promised to help. I leaned back. And I thought I was part of this family. But I guess things change, huh? My sister snapped. You're ruining my education over this. How is that fair? I laughed. Oh, fair? You mean like how stranding me in an airport was fair? Silence. They didn't like that. Finally, my dad sat down across from me. He put on his reasonable father voice, the one he always used when he wanted something. Kurt, he said carefully, be logical about this. You're in a good place financially. This isn't going to hurt you. I raised an eyebrow. And whose fault is it that you're not in a good place financially? That shut him up. I looked around the table. My mom looked pissed. My brother looked desperate. My sister looked like she was about to cry. You guys got so used to me bailing you out, I said, that you thought you could screw me over and nothing would change. Mom clenched her jaw. So, that's it? You're just abandoning your family? I laughed. No, Mom. You abandoned me first. I stood up. Enjoy figuring this out on your own. I walked to the door, hand on the handle. And then my dad said something that made me pause. Kurt, if you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back. I turned around. He was serious. My mom was nodding in agreement. My brother and sister just stared, waiting to see what I'd do. I pretended to think about it. Then I smiled. Okay. And I walked out. They wanted to play games? Fine. Let's see how they do without me. I half expected them to call that night. Maybe my dad would try guilt-tripping me. Maybe my mom would send a long-winded message about family obligations. But no, nothing. For the first time in years, they had nothing to say to me. And honestly, it felt good. I went back to my life working, going out with friends, enjoying the peace of not being my family's personal ATM. It was almost weird, realizing how much lighter I felt now that I wasn't carrying all of them on my back. Then, out of nowhere, my brother called. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me. I picked up. What? Hey, man, he said, way too casual. We were thinking maybe we should do a little family trip, to clear the air. I actually laughed. A family trip? You're joking, right? No, no, listen, he rushed to explain. A nice resort, all of us together. Relax, have fun, no drama, I smirked. And who's paying for it? He hesitated. Well, we figured you could cover it, since you're, doing well. I damn near choked on my own laughter. You're unbelievable. You screwed me over on a vacation, and now you want me to pay for one? I heard my mom's voice in the background. Tell him. We'll let him pick the place. I shook my head. Wow. You guys are cheap and manipulative. You're literally pretending to care about what I want just so you can get a free trip. Kurt, nah, don't even try it. The answer's no. Okay, but you'll think about it, right? I laughed again. No, I won't. And I hung up. That was the moment I knew. They weren't changing. They didn't feel bad. They didn't regret anything. They just wanted me back because they needed me. Unfortunately for them, I didn't need them. At first, they kept trying. My mom would throw little comments like, wow, must be nice to afford all these things. My dad would hint at unexpected expenses, waiting for me to offer help. My sister and brother kept up the fake friendliness for a while, but when they realized I wasn't budging, even they started pulling away. And that was fine. I didn't resent them. I wasn't even mad anymore. I just wasn't their personal bank account anymore. And to them, that was the ultimate betrayal. But the real fun started when they began losing things. My brother, despite my refusal to fund his wedding, had plowed ahead as if money would magically appear. Spoiler, it didn't. A month before the big day, he called me in full panic mode. Okay, listen, I know you said you weren't helping, but I really need you, man. I let him ramble about vendors and deposits before cutting in. I thought you had it covered? Yeah, but things happened. We're short and mom and dad don't have enough. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Damn, that sucks. Kurt, please. If I don't get this money, we're screwed. I pretended to think. All right, I'll help you out. Oh my God, thank you, man. You don't know what this means. I laughed. Yeah, I do. Wait, that's why I'm not actually helping. Have a nice wedding. And I hung up. 2 days later, my parents called me together. A rare event. Mom's voice was serious. Kurt, we need to talk. I played along. Oh? What's wrong? She sighed dramatically. Your brother is in trouble. He needs financial help for the wedding, and we don't have enough. She snapped like it was my fault. Kurt, this is a family emergency. I grinned. Oh, now it's an emergency. That's funny. You didn't seem too worried about me when you canceled my flight. Where was all this family loyalty then? Kurt, don't be childish. You know what? You're right. I should help. In fact, I'll cover the entire wedding. Dead silence. Dad finally spoke. Really? Yeah, I said. On one condition. Anything, my mom said quickly. You and Dad go to the wedding. In a taxi. More silence. A taxi? She repeated. I nodded. No car, no rentals. Just a nice, long, humiliating taxi ride to the biggest event of the year. Just like the one I had to take when you left me stranded. She gasped like I had just insulted her entire bloodline. That's petty. Yeah, it is, I smirked. But hey, if you don't like the deal, you're welcome to figure it out yourselves. They refused, of course. Their pride wouldn't let them. And just like that, my brother's wedding was downgraded from a fancy venue to a sad little church gathering with a backyard reception. And me? I was nowhere to be found. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few months, my parents' finances started crumbling. The house needed repairs. Bills piled up. For the first time in years, they had to live within their actual means. Turns out, they weren't very good at it. My sister had to take out student loans, something she had always avoided because I had been covering her. My brother's new wife wasn't thrilled about the last-minute budget cuts. Their relationship started getting rocky almost immediately. And through it all, I was just living my life, watching them struggle, knowing they had done this to themselves. Then one day, my mom finally broke. She called me, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Kurt, she said, can we please just go back to the way things were? I smiled. We can't. A pause. Then, barely a whisper, why not? I leaned back. Because now you know what it feels like to be left behind. And then, for the first time ever, I hung up on her. After that call with my mom, something shifted. She had always been the one to hold everything together, the one who could manipulate, guilt trip, and sweet talk her way into getting what she wanted. But for the first time ever, she had nothing left to bargain with, and that terrified her. I didn't hear from them for a while after that. Not a single call, not a text, not even some weak attempt at fake small talk. It was almost peaceful. but I knew my family too well. The silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. They weren't giving up. They were waiting, hoping I'd soften up, get nostalgic, miss them enough to come crawling back. They had no idea just how good I was at playing the long game. I kept my distance, but I wasn't completely out of the loop. Word got around. My sister had finally accepted that I wasn't paying her tuition anymore and had to take out student loans. She hated it, complained to anyone who would listen. But funny enough, she never complained to me. My brother's wedding, though, that was a train wreck. His fiancée had expected the lavish wedding they had originally planned, grand venue, designer dress, open bar, the whole thing. But after my parents refused the taxi deal, they couldn't afford it. The new reality? A small church ceremony with a cash bar and homemade food. Apparently, his new wife was not amused. A few months into their marriage, the cracks were already showing. I didn't even feel bad. They all chose this. They thought I was some bottomless pit of money, that no matter how badly they treated me, I'd always be there to pick up the pieces. They learned the hard way that I wasn't. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Dad, huh? That was rare. I let it ring. Voicemail. A minute later, a text. Call me. It's important. I stared at it for a second, then shrugged and called back. Finally, he grumbled as he picked up. I was starting to think you'd never answer. I leaned back in my chair. That was the idea. He sighed. Kurt, listen, your mother and I have been talking. Things are different now. We need to move forward as a family. I smirked. Sounds like you need something. Silence. I let it stretch out, just to make him uncomfortable. Finally, he caved. We're struggling. The house needs major repairs. The bills are piling up and, well, we thought maybe you could help us out. Just this once. I actually laughed. This once? Dad, I was helping you out for years. You don't know what I mean, he snapped, his patience wearing thin. We're in a tough spot. And we're still your parents, for God's sake. Family helps each other. Oh, now we were playing the family card? I shook my head. Nah, you guys made it pretty clear I'm not part of this family anymore. Remember? If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back. His voice tightened. That was different. We were upset. So was I. And you didn't care. He let out a frustrated sigh. Look, Kurt, can't we just move on? I smiled. We did move on. You just don't like where we ended up. More silence. For years, I had let them guilt me into fixing their problems. For years, I had put their needs before mine. And the second I stopped, they fell apart. That wasn't my fault. That was theirs. Dad finally tried a different approach. His voice softened, turning reasonable. We're just asking for a little help. A loan. We'll pay you back. I almost choked on my drink. A loan? I snorted. Dad, name one time you've ever paid me back. He hesitated. Exactly. I sighed, pushing back from my desk. Look, you guys made your choice when you left me stranded at that airport. You wanted to teach me a lesson? Congratulations. I learned it. Now you get to live with it. Kurt, come on. I mean, it's not like you're homeless. I interrupted. I'm sure you'll figure it out. Maybe cut back on luxuries. Oh, and if things get really bad, you can always take a taxi. His voice turned ice cold. You think this is funny? I smiled. A little, yeah. Then I hung up. The fallout was beautiful. My parents, completely out of options, had to downgrade their entire lifestyle. No more fancy trips. No more dinners at expensive restaurants. No more impulse purchases they assumed I would cover. They had to start budgeting. They hated it. My sister, after years of me paying her way, now had to work part-time to afford school. She hated it. My brother's marriage, built on the illusion of wealth, was already on shaky ground. He hated it. They all had to do something they had never done before, take responsibility for their own choices. And that was my revenge. Not yelling, not fighting, not some big dramatic confrontation. Just walking away and letting them deal with the consequences of their own actions. For years, they had relied on me. Now, they had to rely on themselves, and they hated it. A few months later, my mom reached out again. Not to ask for money, not to beg me to come back, just to talk. Kurt, she said, her voice tired, I know we screwed up. I know we hurt you. She sighed. I just want to know if we can ever fix this. I thought about it. Could we? Maybe, but not today. I exhaled. I don't know, Mom. You guys spent years taking me for granted. It's going to take a lot longer than a few months to fix that. She didn't argue. She just said, I understand. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Months passed, and the distance between me and my family settled into something permanent. At first, they tried to pretend everything was fine, like they weren't struggling, like they weren't completely lost without me propping them up. But cracks have a way of showing no matter how hard you try to cover them. And when reality finally hit them, they had no choice but to live in it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I had moved on, but they hadn't. One night, I got a message from my sister. Can we talk? I almost ignored it. But something in the way she phrased it short, direct, no entitlement made me curious. So I replied, about what? A few minutes later, my phone rang. I picked up. Yeah? She hesitated. Then, in a voice so different from the arrogant tone she used to have, she said, I just wanted to say, I get it now. I leaned back in my chair. Get what? All of it, she admitted. How much you did for us. How much we took you for granted. How unfair it was to just expect you to fix everything. Huh? Didn't see that coming. So, what changed? I asked. She let out a weak laugh. Life. Loans. Working while going to school. I guess I just never thought about it before because I never had to. I didn't say anything, letting her sit in that realization. I'm not asking you for anything, she added quickly. I don't want things to be weird forever. I ran a hand down my face. Part of me wanted to brush her off, tell her she should have figured this out sooner. But another part of me, the part that had spent years protecting her, helping her, couldn't ignore the fact that she was actually trying. Look, I sighed. I'm not saying we can go back to how things were, but I appreciate that you're owning up to it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I hope one day you'll trust me again. I didn't answer, because I didn't know if that would ever be possible. A week later, I got a call from my dad. I stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to him since the last time he tried to get money out of me. Curiosity won. I answered, What? He let out a heavy breath. Kurt, I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it anyway. I leaned against the counter. Go on. We messed up. I blinked. He kept going. We were selfish. We took advantage of you. We assumed you'd always be there, and when you weren't, we didn't know what to do. I wasn't expecting him to admit that. We should have treated you better, he continued. Not just because of the money, but because you're our son, and we should have acted like it. I waited, trying to see if there was a catch. Some hidden manipulation, some angle, but there wasn't. Just an old man finally realizing he had pushed too far. So, what now? I asked. That's up to you, he said honestly. I know we don't deserve forgiveness. And I won't pretend this makes up for everything, but I don't want to lose you completely. For the first time in a long time, I believed he meant it. I didn't forgive them that day. I didn't rush back into their lives or offer to fix their mess. But I did let my guard down just a little. We started small, short conversations, basic check-ins, nothing deep, nothing big, just something. My sister was the first one to actually change. She never asked me for another dime, and she never complained about working. And because of that, we slowly became friends again. My dad, well, he was a work in progress, but for the first time in my life, he started treating me like a son instead of a bank. My mom, that took longer. She still struggled with control, with pride, with letting go of the way things used to be, but eventually she had to face the truth. I wasn't her safety net anymore. And once she accepted that, things got easier. One day, months later, we had dinner together. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, lingering resentment, unspoken things still hanging in the air. But for the first time, nobody expected anything from me. Nobody was trying to guilt me, manipulate me, or take from me. And that was enough. For now. Story 2. My wife chuckled and told her friends that he was no longer a man once I lost my job. Before I abandon his broke ass, I'll give him a month. My dad sneered when I begged him for assistance. A guy would never beg. My mother just gave a head shake. That day, I grinned and walked away. They arrived at my door 6 years later, frantic and constantly phoning. When Loretta began applying cosmetics before leaving for work, I should have realized something wasn't right. That was something she had never concerned with before. Most days, just lip gloss and mascara. However, she began rising earlier 3 weeks ago, and when I questioned her about it, she spent over an hour in the loo. She just stated that she wanted to seem more polished. It began like every other morning. As I waited for my coffee to brew, I was browsing Instagram when my phone buzzed with an HR text requesting me to be early for a meeting. No justification, only an urgent conversation is required. Though I told myself it was probably related to the promotion I had been vying for, my stomach fell. I bid Loretta go with a kiss, she murmured, hardly raising her head from her phone. I'll see you later. I dismissed the warning flags without looking at them again. Before she even spoke, the HR woman's expression told me everything. Braden, my immediate supervisor, and 2 other managers were present, and they were all sporting that well-practiced, compassionate looks. Then came the words that completely upended my universe. Inappropriate conduct, several grievances, establishing an antagonistic atmosphere. As they said it out, I sat there in awe. It seems that I had been reported by a number of female coworkers for making inappropriate approaches and provocative remarks. It was just nonsense. They had specific occurrences, dates, and comprehensive reports, all of which were made up but seemed plausible enough on paper, but I seldom ever speak to anyone at work outside of my immediate team. Your job must be terminated immediately. As she pushed a severance payout across the table, the HR woman spoke. Braden refused to give me a glance. They had already made up their minds when I attempted to defend myself. I packed my desk and waited for security to escort me out. Pieces began to fall into place as hands began to shake. Some coworkers had begun to avoid me because of the hushed talks that ceased as I passed by. Loretta. When I realized how long this had been planned, I suddenly became interested in looking well for my stomach. On the way home, I tried contacting Loretta, but it went straight to voicemail. I used my phone to check our joint account and depleted the $43,000 we had saved. Lost. Yesterday, a transfer was made to an unfamiliar account. When I arrived, she was packing a suitcase peacefully at home. Without even seeming astonishment, she remarked, "Took you long enough." "What on earth is happening?" I insisted. "Those grievances. Did this involve you in any way?" She chuckled. In fact, I laughed. "Aren't you a pretty slow person? This has been months in the making. You are now viewed as a creep by everyone at your workplace. I wish you success in this place in obtaining another employment." "Why?" My voice broke. "Why would you harm me in this way?" "Due to your lack of empathy." After 5 years of working at the same unfulfilling job, she spat. "No drive, no courage. You are no longer a guy, Braden." But her grin became sour. "I'm accompanying him on his travels." The room whirled. "Braden." "I've been working under my boss, Braden, for 6 months now," she added, closing her luggage. "He is adept at getting what he desires, not like you." As I tried to comprehend the extent of the betrayal, I collapsed onto the couch. She had gradually ruined my job and reputation in addition to adultery with my employer. As she made her way to the door, she continued, "Don't bother calling your parents. I've already informed them all about your improper conduct. They're repulsed by you. Verify the account. They have already recouped their investment in the remodeling of our home." "She was correct," my dad said. "We raised you better than this," when I frantically contacted my parents. In the background, my mother was weeping. I couldn't even explain it to them. They just stated that they needed time to comprehend how disappointed I had been that evening. In a Walmart parking lot, I slept in my car. Loretta was the owner of the residence. I had foolishly consented to another of her demands. No family, no house, no work, no money. She had stolen everything. But something hardened inside me as I lay there, watching trucks thunder by in the dark. The shock and pain solidified into icy fury. Loretta believed that I was broken by her. Make me become nothing. She had stolen everything from me. However, she had overlooked one important detail. I had nothing left to lose because of her. I launched my notes app and got to work making plans. This was not the end of it. By no means. My parents, Loretta Braden, everyone believed that I lacked courage and was weak and pitiful. I was determined to prove to them their folly. In their tale, they wanted me to be the bad guy. All right. I would provide them with an unforgettable villain. First update, I never imagined that I would be the man dozing off in his car outside a 24-hour gym. But I was here. My old friend Gavin eventually learnt about my predicament through common pals after 3 nights of this torture. His message was straightforward. Come on, get your ass. You can use the guest room as long as you need it. The truth of things struck me that night when I walked into his apartment. My laptop, a few basic toiletries, and my clothes are all packed into 2 duffel bags. My life had devolved into that. Gavin simply handed me a beer and said, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here." He didn't ask any questions. I took a week to tell the entire narrative. Loretta's treachery, Braden's affair, the void accounts. My folks are abandoning everything. After listening to me and becoming irate on my behalf, Gavin said something that stayed. You're not damaged. You're just getting started, and you're doing it more cleverly this time. I took on 2 jobs, bartending at night and doing backbreaking labor throughout the day. It seemed like we were getting closer to the bottom with each shift. On most days, though, the physical tiredness kept the fury at bay. Then came the day I heard several locals discussing the launch of a new company in the downtown area. When I heard Loretta's name, I almost dropped the glass I was cleaning. During my break, I brought up Facebook with trembling hands. She was joyful as she announced her new business endeavor and their engagement to Braden. Many compliments were left in the comment area, including one from my own mother, who expressed her pride in her future daughter-in-law. That evening, I gave my sister a call. She was the only one who continued to speak, albeit in a low voice to appease our parents. Her words chilled me to the bone. Loretta's company was the investment of Mom and Dad's retirement funds. Everything, $175,000 every day. I got to work excavating the following morning. I had to, not because I wanted to. My parents were like this. The pieces began to fit together, even if they had abandoned me. For months, Loretta had been organizing this. Our accounts were depleted by the rumors about me at work and my affair with Braden. Everything was premeditated. My parents' retirement fund was the target of her startup capital needs. My mind would race as I lay awake in Gavin's guest room on some nights. The previous version of myself would have gone straight after her, most likely caused a commotion. But during those nights in my car, I had undergone a transformation. Every time I felt like blowing up, I had learned to be patient. She laughed when I confronted her about the affair, as I recall. "You're no longer a man," she had stated. My motivation came from those words. I began journaling everything I came across, including times, dates, bank transfers, message screenshots, and anything else that revealed a pattern. I heard that Braden had done this previously at his previous job, and that Loretta was already discussing growing the business before it had even opened. People love to chat with bartenders. Presenting my parents' wealth to potential investors as evidence of her success. When I saw my dad at the grocery store, it was the tipping point. He appeared to be 10 years older. Shoulders drooped, looking up the costs of everything. I watched him return a package of his favorite cookies, but he didn't notice me. Instead, going with the store brand, he used to get those every week from my mother. With anger and guilt mingling in my stomach, I puked in Gavin's bathroom that evening. The announcement was then published in the local newspaper. A local business owner launches their ideal venture. Loretta was standing in front of her new store, discussing how she and her amazing future in-laws could create something out of nothing. My parents appeared in the picture at the opening, trying to smile but with a worried expression on their faces. I added that newspaper to my journal after carefully folding it. Not because I required additional proof. I had plenty, but because sometimes you need to hit rock bottom to realize you're not actually falling anymore. You're getting ready to push back up. Looking at that article, something clicked. Loretta thought she'd won because she'd taken everything, but she'd forgotten the most important thing. She'd given me freedom. I had nothing left to lose. And that made me dangerous. Not in a violent way. I was done letting her make me the bad guy. No, I was going to do this. Smart, legal, and most importantly, I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly who she was. I closed my journal and opened my laptop. Time to start sharing some stories of my own. The second update. It started with a WhatsApp message. Just one screenshot sent anonymously to Kelly, Braden's wife. A single conversation between Loretta and Braden discussing their weekend plans while I was supposedly at my friend's place. Seeing that message get marked as read felt like lighting a fuse. Working at Danny's bar gave me exactly what I needed. Gossip travels fast in a small town, especially when alcohol is involved. I didn't even have to try hard. Just a casual mention here and there about how my ex-wife was now with my old supervisor. People filled in the blanks themselves, especially the regulars who had seen me working double shifts to make ends meet after losing everything. "Did you hear about that new boutique opening up on Mason Street?" one of the regulars asked, nursing his beer owners. "That woman who stole her husband's savings and ran off with his boss." The story spread like wildfire through neighborhood, Facebook groups, and local forums. Every time Loretta posted about her business on social media, the comment section filled with thinly veiled references to her affair. Kelly showed up at Danny's one night. Mascara streaked down her face. "Is it true?" she demanded, slamming her phone on the bar. More screenshots, more evidence. All those late meetings and business trips suddenly made sense to her. I just bought her a drink and listened. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Braden's perfect life crumbled within weeks. His kids stopped talking to him. His church group quietly asked him to step down from leadership. The mortgage on their new house suddenly felt a lot heavier on a single income. I was restocking the bar when Loretta first tried calling. Then came the texts. "You've ruined everything. Why are you doing this to me? Braden left me because of you. Your parents are going to lose everything." That last one was supposed to hurt, I guess. But watching their investment in Loretta's foolproof business plan go up in smoke felt like justice. The same parent who told me to man up when I lost everything were now facing foreclosure. Funny how karma works. The boutique's grand opening was a disaster. Word had spread about Loretta's reputation. And in our town, reputation is everything. Local vendors pulled out last minute. The few customers who showed up were mostly there to whisper and stare. The local newsletter, which had originally planned a feature store, quietly dropped it. Braden came to the bar one night, drunk and angry. "You planned this?" he slurred, pointing a shaky finger at me. "You destroyed my family." The irony was almost funny. Almost. I just called him a ride and went back to wiping down glasses. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents. Their retirement savings were gone. The house they'd lived in for 30 years was slipping away. They wanted to talk things through, fix things, find a solution as a family. Delete, delete, delete. Loretta's boutique limped along for another month before the going out of business signs went up. She tried rebranding, dropping prices, everything. But in a small town, once people turn against you, that's it. Game over. The last time I saw her that month, she was standing outside the empty shop, staring through the window at the bare mannequin. The sight didn't give me the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt nothing. And somehow, that felt better than revenge. My parents left another voicemail. "Please, son, we were wrong. We need your help." I saved that one. Not because I planned to help, but because sometimes it's nice to have a reminder of how far you've come. The boutique's windows were papered over by the end of the week. Loretta's dream of being a successful businesswoman died with a whimper. Not a bang. No dramatic showdown, no big confrontation. Just the quiet death of reputation and trust. My regulars at the bar still sometimes bring up the story. It's become local legend, a cautionary tale about karma and consequences. But I don't engage anymore. I've got better things to focus on. The last text I got from Loretta read, "I know you're behind all this, but you can't prove it, can you? You calculated everything perfectly." I didn't react. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. Besides, I was too busy checking out properties at the upcoming foreclosure auction. I heard there might be some interesting opportunities coming up. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've learned it's best served by just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own action. The domino effect takes care of the rest. As I locked up the pub that night, I wiped the final vestiges of their texts from my phone. Tomorrow would bring fresh possibilities, new starts, and for some new consequences. Some folks call it vengeance, I call it karma. Either way, I sleep quite great at night. Finally, update after 2 years of patient waiting, everything finally started falling into place. I hadn't planned it this way, but sometimes karma works in amazing ways. I was surfing through Facebook when I spotted Loretta's urgent business announcement post. Her tiny boutique was closing forever. Not just closing, but being taken by creditors. All that boasting about her entrepreneurial ideas and revolutionizing local retail had resulted to exactly what I'd expected, a spectacular disaster. The comment section was harsh. Maybe if you'd concentrated more on operating your business instead of sleeping with married men. Someone had even tagged Braden's ex-wife, who'd added a laughing emoji. I won't lie, I screenshotted that entire thread. My phone buzzed. Today is Mom's third call. Like the last 12, I left it on voicemail. In any case, the communications this week were identical. The house was ready to be taken away from them. They required assistance. They expressed regret. The final section was novel. That is what I'll offer them. It's funny how sorry arrived just after the notification of foreclosure. You aren't a true man. When I had approached them for assistance 2 years prior, Dad had stated. After Loretta cleared out our accounts, I slept in my vehicle. They now want the return of their son. The irony of yesterday's sale was not missed. I kept my trip a secret from everyone. Appeared as any other inquisitive neighbor, dressed normally, hands in my pockets. Huddled in the back, appearing smaller than I recalled, were my parents as well. It wasn't until I won the auction that they noticed me. Their expressions when I held out my bidding card for the last time. The down payment was well worth it just for that moment. Dad's face took on an intriguing purple hue. Mom burst into tears. I didn't even look in their direction while I filled out the form. Later, they cornered me in the parking lot. Dad attempted to enlarge his chest like he has in the past. Son, we can figure something out. Don't you think a true guy would beg? Echoing what he had said 2 years prior, I interrupted him. I heard that from you. Or is that rule just applicable when I'm the one who's requesting assistance? With mascara streaming down her cheeks, Mom took hold of my arm. Where are your parents, please, Bryce? Were my parents present? I corrected her. Tomorrow, the eviction notice will be sent out. You've got 30 days. Dad lost it. Considering everything we've done for you, including secretly putting my college funds in Loretta's business endeavor, he became even more irate when I maintained my composure, or anything like lying to the whole family about her romance. They continued to converse, but I simply left. Behind me, their voices dwindled into the background noise I had learnt to ignore. I rented their home to a young family with 3 children the next week. In this market, decent individuals are having trouble finding goods at a reasonable price. To further complicate matters, I offered them a price that was far below than market value. Mom noticed them relocating. That day, she passed by 6 times. Every pass was captured by the security cameras I installed, so I know. But the true icing on the cake, I discovered that Loretta is currently employed at O'Malley's. I used to go to the same pub while I was trying to start again. After her business grew, she started last week and sorely needed the employment. Sometimes the universe may be humorous. Last night, I went there with my girlfriend. To be honest, I hadn't planned it. Sarah was eager to sample the new cuisine. Who was I to refuse? Our waiter was Loretta. Her expression when she realized who I was, priceless. They were short-staffed, so she attempted to get another waitress to take our table. What am I able to get you? She hardly raised her voice beyond a whisper. I never even glanced up at the menu. Like any other waitress, she just placed my order. Is there another stranger? Fortunately for Sarah, she was unaware of Loretta's identity. I no longer discussed that period of my life. We joked, shared dessert, had a great supper, and, because I'm not a monster, we left a generous tip. I overheard Loretta's boss berating her for a poorly executed order as we were heading out. Apparently, she was on thin ice. Without looking, I passed by while holding Sarah's hand and felt the weight of my house and the keys to the house where my parents had lived for 30 years. Retaliation, according to some, doesn't lead to peace. They could be correct. But seeing my parents' possessions stacked in their sister's garage, and Loretta fumbling to carry dishes while wearing the same cheap polyester uniform I used to wear, the aim was never peace. Yesterday, I received photos from the young family living in my parents' former home. The kitchen is being painted yellow, establishing a garden in the location of Mom's beloved roses. Life goes on. It can occasionally move just where you want it to. I'm going to meet her parents tomorrow. I get the impression that they're decent individuals. This time, however, I've learned not to put my confidence in family members simply because they're related. I maintain my own accounts, places, and escape routes this time. And I'm not a true man. If someone ever says that, let's just say I've discovered a way to disprove them. Story 3, I never imagined that I would reach this point in my life. Yet here I am, Audrey, at the age of 28, living my dream at last. Okay, in a way. The mortgage payments make me cringe every month, and the flat I recently purchased still needs some attention. However, it belongs to me, mine alone. I have something to show for my 6 years of hard work in real estate. It wasn't simple to get here. I recall working 2 jobs to make ends meet in the early days after receiving my license. I would attempt to seem more confident than I actually was when I showed houses to prospective buyers during the day. After that, I would dash to my managerial evening job in a corporate office, where I would labor through monotonous paperwork until my eyes burned. However, I persisted, expanding my clientele one transaction at a time. I sometimes wish my father could see me now that I'm living alone in my new home. He never stopped believing in me. I always claimed that I would succeed. However, he was never able to witness it. He died in the midst of my first year of college, when I was 18. Everything changed at that point. And not only due of his passing, within a year Mom got married again. At first glance, Tom appeared to be a decent person, but he had baggage. Mike and Sarah, 2 children, were 14 and 15 years old at the time. I made an effort to be sympathetic. I did, really. After Dad's death, Mom deserved to be content. Tom, however, thought differently about how things ought to be. This place has to be updated, he said, just 3 months after moving in one day. He was painting over the walls when I got home from the weekend at college. Together, Dad and I had decorated. Dad's pictures were all gone, somewhere packed up. I was unable to locate them. Where are the photos of Dad? Trying to stabilize my kid, I asked Mom that night. She hardly raised her gaze from the magazine. Oh, sweetheart. It may be uncomfortable, Tom thought. You get it? Correct. We must proceed. It wasn't only the pictures, though. The room where I grew up was converted into Sarah and Mike's game room. They set up a computer and, of all things, a slot machine. My room, my memories supplanted by their incessant laughing and beeping equipment. During your visit, you are welcome to utilize the guest room. Brightly, as though she were doing me a favor, Mom said. There was almost enough space in the guest room for a bed and a tiny table, but I had nothing to say. I was only the daughter who was visiting. Right now, Mike and Sarah were quite clear that they did not want me around. There was always a fresh accident when I got home from college. My old stuffed animals were discovered in the garbage, and my name was inexplicably removed from all of the family pictures on the walls of my high school yearbooks that were suddenly water damaged. After then, life fell into a rhythm. After graduating from college and beginning my work, I made an effort to keep up a contact with my mother. I tried, but our phone conversations become fewer and shorter. During the claustrophobic guest room and the barely disguised animosity from my step-siblings, I would drop by every few weeks. Look who at last realized we were here! Sarah's voice would be brimming with phony sweetness. She was still living at home at the age of 25. I'm still being treated like an unwelcome visitor. Mike wasn't any better at 24. He makes disparaging remarks about my life, my career, my wardrobe, and whatever else he can use as fodder. Tom, on the other hand, would sit there grinning smugly and occasionally make small jabs of his own property. He would say during supper, "Playing home all day must be enjoyable." There are some of us who have actual employment. Mom would sit silently, acting as though she was unaware of the strain. She seemed to have fully vanished into their family, leaving no space for me. I made an effort to ignore it and get over it. I concentrated on developing my profession and my personal life. My clientele expanded, my commission checks increased in size, and I began to establish myself in the local real estate market, little by little. But then there was that meal, that terrible last straw meal. That evening, Sarah was in her rare form, attacking everything from my hair to the wine I had selected. I gritted my teeth and waited there until she went too far. It must be pleasant, she said. You can start in real estate with mommy's connections. In fact, some of us must work to make a livelihood. Something broke inside of me. 10 years of keeping my mouth shut and enduring their abuse spilled forth. Make a living by working. Even to my own ears, the sound of my laughter was unpleasant. From someone who is almost 30 years old and still relies on her father's income, that's a lot of money. How long has it been since you last searched for a job? The ensuing hush was deafening. With tears streaming down her cheeks, Sarah fled the table. Tom rose, his face flushed with rage. "You tiny brat, you're horrible," he spit. "You have no right to talk like that to my daughter." I looked to my mother in the maybe naive hope that she would finally defend me. She shook her head instead. She had disappointment on her face. "Audrey, I'm shocked that you would say anything so hurtful. I did not raise you that way. I came to the realization that nothing will ever change. Every time Mom would pick them over me, always. I was crying as I left my mother's house that evening. They weren't sad tears, though. They were ones that were furious. In my life, for the first time, I felt finished. Stop attempting to win over everyone. It's time to stop being cautious. Don't act like this is normal any longer. Mom's side of the family bombarded my phone with texts the next morning, all of them expressing how awful I felt for offending Sarah. She had been mistreating me for years, but none of them brought it up. They all don't seem to give a damn about how I feel. "This time, you've really done it." Mom sent an SMS. "I'm not sure what's bothering you, but I believe it would be best if you didn't come over until you apologized to Sarah and Tom." I took a long time to look at the message before I typed my reply. "I won't, so don't worry." The ensuing weeks were fairly quiet. I put all of my effort into clinching transaction after contract. My commission check was proof that my clients adored me. I started looking at new automobiles because I'd always desired a certain model, not because I needed to brag. I felt like a new person the day I pulled my Mercedes off the lot. More self-assured, more prosperous, more of me. I couldn't help but snap some pictures and share them online. I was unprepared for what transpired after the flood of likes and comments. My phone rang. The screen showed Mom's name. I hadn't heard from her in 3 months, but now she was phoning. She kept calling, but I initially put it on voicemail. I picked up at last. "Hi there, Audrey, my love." She had a lovely, syrupy voice. "You've been on my mind a lot recently. This scenario has to be fixed immediately. How about we have supper together tomorrow?" I nearly burst out laughing. Silence for 3 months. And she wanted to make things right after I shared pictures of my new Mercedes. "I don't think that's a smart idea, Mom. Honey, please." I spoke with Tom and the children. Everything makes them feel awful. Everybody wants to put things right. I ought to have declined. I ought to have realized it. However, there was a part of me that wanted to trust her, that foolish, idealistic part that never seemed to learn. I drove up to my new automobile and my old residence the next evening. When Tom spotted the Mercedes, I believe his eyes about burst out of his head as he stood in the driveway. In the doorway came Mike and Sarah, both with looks I had never seen before. Something in the middle of calculating and respect. "Take a look at this person." Mom came running to give me a hug. "We've missed you terribly, my love. It was a bizarre meal." Tom praised my professional decisions. Sarah was genuinely interested in my clients and inquired about them. Even my chair was pushed out for me by Mike. In between classes, I had the impression that I had entered a parallel reality where people genuinely loved me. I was pulled aside in the kitchen by Mom. I spoke with them for a long time. She squeezed my arm and murmured. They acknowledged their mistakes. They wished to make a new beginning. I wished to trust her. How? God, I wished to trust her. And it appeared genuine for a time. I began going more frequently. The nasty joke came to an end. The mocking remarks vanished. All of a sudden, they were curious in my life, career, and achievements. But then I began to see trends. Without fail, the topic of their living predicament would come up with every visit. At first, it was subtle. Simply said, "This ancient house has changed," Tom would say, giving me a serious look. "Last week, the roof began to leak once more. The heating expenditures are getting out of control," Mom would say. Mike and Sarah would add their own grievances. Outdated, with little storage space and toilets. Everything. Every time they would gaze at me with anticipation, anticipating something. Every time this occurred, I made an effort to shift the topic, but they persisted. My mother once followed me to my car as I was leaving one evening. She ran a hand over the Mercedes hood and murmured, "You know, honey, now you're doing well. Having such a luxurious life must be amazing." It made my skin crawl when she stressed comfort. I put the idea aside, even though I was beginning to see why they had suddenly been so kind to me. After all, they were family. Perhaps they had changed after all. Then her mother revealed that she will soon be 55. She brought it up casually over coffee, but the way everyone looked at me was anything but casual. "It's a significant milestone," she stated. "I have been considering the appropriate way to celebrate it." I fell for the ruse. "Mom, don't worry about making any plans. I will handle everything." I should have been alerted by the glance that went back and forth between her and Tom. There should have been warning signs when Sarah and Mike suddenly developed a strong obsession with their phones. However, I continued to ignore all the indications because I was so determined to believe in this new version of our family. After throwing a lavish party at my friend Rachel's fancy restaurant in the heart of the city, I made the decision to take the entire family on a surprise trip to Hawaii. I felt sick at the idea of paying for Tom, Sarah, and Mike's vacation, but I convinced myself that it was worth it to please my mother. My main focus shifted to organizing Mom's birthday party. I immediately gave Rachel a call. I told her that I wanted everything to be flawless. Money is not a problem. Rachel's enthusiasm was infectious. "Honey, let me do it. My friends and relatives will receive a discount from me. But believe me, this will be a memorable occasion." She would be correct, if only she realized it. I felt a little sad when my mother emailed me her guest list. 25 of the 30 were related to Tom. Looking for names I knew from Dad's side of the family, I scanned down the list. I was once looked after by Aunt Susan. Not present. I learned how to ride a bike from Uncle Jack. I miss my cousin Emma, who I grew up thinking of as a sister. Not a trace. Without informing my mother, I put them on the list. They are deserving, even if she hadn't thought of them. Susan became silent for a second when I called out to her to join us. "Sweetheart, are you certain?" she inquired. "Your mother made it quite evident that we were no longer welcome the last time I visited her." "I'm positive." I spoke aggressively. "My family also includes you." I went to Mom's place the next week to talk over the specifics of the celebration. As soon as I entered, Sarah cornered me. "So," she began, making a vain attempt to appear informal, "you're giving Mom the restaurant party as a gift." Mom gave her a warning glance, but I decided to ignore it. I said, "That's part of it. I'm planning something different." Unexpectedly. My first hint should have been the way they all jumped when I said surprise. Mike abruptly became highly engaged in the discourse when Tom and Mom exchanged glances. Unexpectedly, a mother leaned forward. "What sort of a surprise, my love?" I simply shook my head and grinned. "You will need to wait and find out." The hour that followed was agonizing. They alternated in attempting to get information out of me while giving me more and more overt clues regarding residences. Tom showed me every small repair that needed to be done around the house. Mom let out a loud sigh at how claustrophobic everything seemed. Mike and Sarah joined together to gripe about having to use the same loo. Tom pointed to a water stain on the ceiling and remarked, "You know, Audrey, with your real estate knowledge, you must be well informed about suitable housing options." I gave a vague nod. "At the moment, the market is rather busy. You and other effective agents need to have a wide range of contacts," Mom added, looking at me thoughtfully. I acted as though I didn't grasp what they were saying. "Yes, I have a strong network. It does assist with sales, yes." "Sales?" Sarah whispered to herself. "Correct." They circled closer and closer to what they truly desired as the evening continued in this manner. Reminding myself that it would all be worthwhile, I continued to deflect. When they noticed the surprise from Hawaii, then perhaps they would see how much I valued family, not in the manner they had anticipated. On the evening of Mom's birthday celebration, Rachel had gone above and above. With its exquisite floral arrangements, gentle lighting, and immaculately laid tables, the restaurant exuded a sense of wonder. I got there early to make sure everything was in order, including the Hawaii surprise package, first-class airline tickets, and family resort bookings. first chances, Dad's family came up and gave me a strong embrace while whispering, "You've developed into a very amazing woman. Your dad would be very pleased." I suppressed my tears. "Regards, Aunt Susan. I'm so happy you're here." Loud, laughing, and stronger comments filled the restaurant as Tom's relatives arrived in a boisterous bunch. They essentially pushed Dad's family to the sidelines by claiming the nicest tables. I bit my tongue as I watched things unfold. Instead than focusing on old issues, tonight was meant to be about family healing. Sarah, Tom, Mike, and Mom all showed their fashionably late. Although Mom looked stunning in her new outfit, there was something strange about the way she gazed around the room, particularly when she saw Dad's family. "Why are they in this place?" As I gave her a hug, she snarled at me. "They're moms to the family. They wanted to join you in celebrating." Sister Janet began the toasts to my amazing brother Tom before she could say anything. She gave me a glance that I couldn't quite decipher. Who gave this family a good guy to rely on and rescued them? Janet lifted her glass. At these statements, I saw Dad's family members tense up. Uncle Jack shook her head slightly and stroked his arm as if he wanted to say something. As the toast went on, Tom's family members took turns complimenting him and his kids and remarking on what a wonderful family they had grown into. Mom smiled proudly while I grew more and more nauseous. It was my time at last. Holding the exquisitely wrapped package with the Hawaii surprise inside, I got to my feet. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling a little. "You've always shown a desire to travel and experience new things. I wanted to get you something unique for your birthday." I gave the package to her. She accepted it with a peculiar look. As she opened it, she felt more like distrust than joy. There was silence in the room. Mom gazed at the brochures for the resort and the airline tickets. She was getting darker every second. "What is meant to be this?" "It is. The family is on vacation," I clarified, perplexed by her response. "Hawaii first-class tickets. All of your expenditures were covered during your 2 weeks at a 5-star resort." I had never seen an explosion like the one that followed. "A trip," Mom spoke in a chilly tone. "We desire a vacation, don't you think?" Tom rose, his face flushed with rage. "After all of our clues, this is what you call a birthday present." "So, even though I was beginning to grasp with terrible clarity," I repeated. Then Sarah leaped to her feet. "For months we have been telling you what Mom truly want in a home. She desired a home. You are self-centered and foolish." "Which one?" There was silence in the diner. Standing close to the bar, Rachel watched in terror. "A home?" What I was hearing was unbelievable. "Did you think I would purchase you a home?" Mom remarked, her voice brimming with sadness. "We thought you understood. All of those discussions on our living arrangement. What made you so stupid?" I surveyed the space. While Dad's family sat in stunned silence, Tom's family was nodding in agreement. I tried to speak steadily and slowly as I said, "I'm a real estate agent. I sell homes. They are not given away for free by me. I spent a money on this vacation because it is a fortune." Tom laughed. "Please. We've seen your vehicle. We are aware that you can afford more than an inexpensive trip." I lost it at that point. "Could you please have security escort these people out?" I went to Rachel and said, "This is impossible." 2 security officers came up and Mom screamed, "My birthday is being celebrated." I took the ticket box out of her hands. "No more. It isn't. And none of it is fair to you." Chaos ensued. As they were released, insults were thrown by Tom's relatives. Sarah cried out that I had always envied their ideal family. Mike gave me every nickname he could come up with. Mom simply shook her head in disdain as she stood there. The restaurant was strangely silent after they had departed. Uncle Jack then stated, "I think it's time we remembered the real man of this family," as he got to his feet and lifted his glass. "To the amazing father, David Mitchell, who would have been extremely proud of his daughter." I felt like I was with my actual family again for the first time in years as we spent the remainder of the evening telling stories about Dad. Surprisingly, the 2 weeks after the birthday catastrophe were quiet. As if nothing had occurred, I plunged myself into my business, showing clients residences and closing agreements. However, everything was different now. I felt really free for the first time in my life, free from the burden to prove myself to those who would never accept me, the guilt, and the manipulation. My phone was eerily silent. Mom didn't call. Neither Mike nor Sarah texted. Tom didn't leave any irate voicemails. I relished the stillness even though I knew it wouldn't last. I became closer to Dad's side of the family at this period, and he asked me home for Sunday dinners, the same as when I was younger. One evening when we were sipping tea on her veranda, she commented, "You know, Catherine was your father's constant concern. Your mother. He said that she required too much attention from others. He feared that one day it might harm you." I gazed into my cup of tea. He was correct. I only wish I had noticed it earlier. After the party, I immediately canceled all of the reservations for Hawaii. I planned another vacation using it. For Dad's relatives who had stayed with me that night, I had arranged a week-long Mediterranean cruise. I persisted even though they initially attempted to deny. My phone rang as I was in the process of making reservations for their trip. The screen displayed Mom's number. Something told me that I should listen to whatever she had to say, so I almost didn't respond. "Hi there?" I spoke in a neutral tone. "Audrey." Mom's voice was controlled and tight. "Just business, no affection, no apologies. We must discuss what transpired." She didn't go on, so I waited. "How about it? First of all, you made us seem bad in front of everyone. But we can talk about that later. We have a more urgent problem now." I allowed her to carry on even though I could tell where this was leading. "Yesterday, Mike was involved in an automobile accident. It's nothing major, but the repairs will cost a lot of money." We assumed I interrupted her with a giggle since you're doing so well. I was unable to resist. It was almost remarkable how bold they were. "I want to clarify this," I said. "You're phoning me to want money, not to express regret for what transpired on your birthday?" "Audrey, don't be so emotional. Family is helpful. Family." "Speaking of assistance, you might at least reimburse us for the money you would have spent on your Hawaii trip since you had to cancel it. It's just." With my phone clamped to my ear, I listened to my mother's requests at my home office with an odd feeling of clarity. Suddenly, everything made sense. The birthday catastrophe, the years of manipulation, and the unexpected generosity after witnessing my accomplishment. Family has never been a factor. What they could obtain from me had always been the focus. I interrupted her diatribe about family responsibilities by whispering, "Mom, that money was used by me. I'm planning a Mediterranean cruise for Dad's family." There was an overwhelming quiet on the other end. Her voice was shaking with anger when she finally spoke. "You dare? You no longer consider those folks to be your true family. Your mommy is me. Are we members of your family?" "No," I said in a voice, steady. "Ever since you decided to side with Tom and his children instead of me, you have not been a part of my family. You watched as they occupied the house where I grew up and removed any traces of my father, whereas they saw me as an unwelcome visitor. You did nothing as they harassed and denigrated me for years." "That is untrue. You were always liked by me. Mom, love is insufficient. I wasn't protected by you. You failed to defend me. You allowed them to force me to leave my own family. The only reason you want me around now is because you believe I can buy you stuff." "What specifically have you done for me after everything that I have done for you?" I inquired. "What have you really done to support or assist me since Dad passed away?" "I made the effort to attend college. My career was developed by myself. I purchased my own house. You are only interested in my life when you are trying to get something out of me." At that moment, she began to cry. "However, I've witnessed this act far too often. Your mommy is me. You can't simply leave me." "Mom, I won't leave you. I'm releasing myself at last. I can no longer be a part of your life, yet I don't mean any damage. You, Tom, Sarah, Mike, I'm not in charge of you. Take care of your own issues. Go about your own life. Please don't involve me." I blocked their numbers after hanging up. Each and every one. After that, I sat there for a while, examining the pictures on my desk. One of myself and my father smiling at the camera at my high school graduation. A new one from the evening of Mom's birthday celebration, and another of Aunt Susan and Uncle Jack at Christmas last year. Dad's family is here with me, and we are all lifting our glasses in his honor. My people were these. My actual family was this. I went to work as usual the following day. I arranged my family's Mediterranean trip, negotiated transactions, and showed homes to customers. Life continued, but now it was different. Better, lighter. I often wonder if my mother really realized what she had lost. She desired something far more precious than cash, presents, or a magnificent home. A daughter who, had she been a true mother in return, would have done anything for her. I no longer think about it, though. I've discovered that family isn't about blood, duty, or maintaining appearances. It has to do with acceptance, love, and support. It has to do with those that support you without asking anything in return. It's about supporting one another out of a desire to do so rather than out of obligation. Story 4, Rebecca. You're leaving your family behind. My workplace was silent until my mother's voice rang loudly over the phone. I could already feel the strain building as I squeezed the bridge of my nose. I've told you this 100 times, Mom. I can't continue to save Brian. He is 30 years old. He must accept accountability for his own actions. Her reply was quick, incisive, and filled with the same accusations of guilt that I had heard a million times before. He is your sibling. Family members are meant to support one another. I took a quick look at my desk's nicely arranged papers, memories of the tremendous hours I put in to keep myself stable. Mom, I've been there for him for years. It has nothing to do with family. It has to do with his lack of concern. He wants me to clean up the mess again after he squandered all of his cash. I'm Rebecca, and I've been the family's responsible member for as long as I can remember. I grew up quickly when my dad died when I was 12 years old, taking on more than most children my age ever had to. By now, though, my brother Brian always had a way of sliding. Despite working part-time at a convenience shop at the age of 30, he was still able to spend all of his savings on pricey devices. When his landlord threatened to evict him, he took unaffordable trips and nights out. My mother didn't inquire. She wanted me to pay his rent. I declined. That choice threw my mom and Brian into a complete meltdown. I woke up to a notice on my phone 2 days later. When I entered Facebook and read a lengthy message from my mother, my heart fell. Unfortunately, not everyone thinks that family should remain together. Some would sooner forsake their own blood than lend a helping hand. It's unfortunate when family values are subordinated to greed. I'm genuinely let down. People the first hadn't seen in years left remarks, expressing condolences and scolding me for being callous or self-centered. Then there came the post from Brian. I never imagined my own sister would abandon me, but I suppose she values money over her family. I know who truly has my back, at least. Thank you, Mother. The treachery hurt more than the words did. To everyone we knew, they were portraying me as a villain, fabricating the tale to portray myself as callous. Setting my phone down, I gazed out the window, a simmering anger under the surface. They publicly shamed me for setting limits as a kind of retaliation for all the sacrifices I had made for them over the years. But I made a choice when the rage subsided into something more pronounced. I was prepared to fight back if they wanted to make this a public show. I couldn't get rid of the rage that was running through me after viewing those Facebook posts. After my dad went away, I made a concerted effort to be the trustworthy person to look after the family. However, this was excessive. With my laptop open in front of me, I sat down at my kitchen table and mentally relived the last several years. How many times had I intervened on Brian's behalf? There are too many to count. When he stopped coming up for work 2 years ago, he lost his job. Until he discovered another one, I paid his bills. I gave him the money to fix his car when it broke down, only to discover later that he had used it to purchase concert tickets. And he immediately turned to internet shopping and expensive trainers with the money he'd borrowed to get back on his feet. Even Brian's carelessness wasn't the worst part. It was my mother's steadfast support for him. Boys are not like other people. Every time I brought it up, she would say, all he needs is time to get his act together. Years of justifications have passed since then. She had gone from defending me to openly demonizing me after those Facebook remarks. I opened my email with the intention of answering a question about my job, but I was unable to concentrate. I was unable to go past the knot in my gut. It was enough. I made a call to a lawyer later that night. I described the circumstances. I described the posts and the harm they had done to my reputation, my voice trembling with annoyance. I said, I can't allow them get away with this. I was scarcely able to control my rage. The attorney attentively listened before answering. Although defamation lawsuits can be complex, you have the right to take action if their posts have seriously harmed you on a professional or emotional level. Let's begin by obtaining proof. With a mix of relief and rage, I hung up the phone. Someone was on my side at last. However, as I collected screenshots of the posts, I had a thought. Brian and I each received an inheritance from my dad that was meant to be safeguarded until we turned 25. It hadn't occurred to me in years, assuming that my share was securely stored in an account. My curiosity overcame me. The next day, I gave the lawyer another call. Could you check into my inheritance while we're at it? I simply want to confirm that everything is in order. Of course, the attorney said. That request was going to reveal a far greater betrayal than a few Facebook postings, although I was unaware of it at the time. I got an email that made me shiver a week after I had phoned the attorney. Results of the Red Inheritance investigation are the topic line. I attentively read the summary after clicking on it. My attorney had learnt that Brian had been taking money out of what should have been my share of the inheritance for the previous 5 years. Up until my 25th birthday, my mother had been in charge of the account. However, it appeared that Brian had acquired it in some way and had been using it often ever since. As I flipped over the page, my hands shook. Thousands of money were lost. Who knew what I had done with money I didn't even realize I possessed? My lawyer's voice was stern but calm when I phoned him for further information. Your sibling seems to have entered the account without your consent. It is obviously stolen. Much of what was rightly yours has been stolen by him. I tried to take in what he was saying while leaning back in my chair. How did this occur? For years, my mother managed the account. Nothing regarding Brian having access was ever mentioned by her. She might not have known. That's what the lawyer said. She could have trusted him to handle things appropriately, though. It's a major violation in any case. The ramifications were astounding. Not only had Brian been stealing from me, but my mother had also allowed it to happen that evening, whether she knew it or not. I was sitting at my kitchen table looking at the financial documents that I had received from my lawyer. Every transaction was like being slapped across the face. Electronics, trips, and concert tickets, things that I had found difficult to pay for myself when Brian was living off of my money. All of a sudden, the Facebook post seemed like the least of my issues. This was no longer only about humiliating in public. The whole foundation of my family was betrayed by this. I considered phoning my mother at that very moment to demand answers, but I restrained myself. There would just be more deflection and guilt-tripping if you confronted her without a plan. I emailed my lawyer instead. What will happen next? I inquired. I decided I wasn't going to let this go by the time I went to bed. I had been the one who made sacrifices and maintained harmony for years, while Brian got away with everything. No more. One thought kept coming to me as I switched off the light. They're going to discover just who they're up against. I spoke with my lawyer about the next steps in his office the following day. As I presented all the information he had discovered, the cramped space felt oppressive. The inheritance isn't the only issue here, I spoke aggressively. My mother and Brian have gone too far. Even though those Facebook posts were awful, I now learn that he has been defrauding me for years. I want to do something about it. Take serious action, my attorney gave a nod. His face was composed and businesslike. First, we will file a defamation lawsuit based on the posts on social media. However, we will need to pursue a different case in relation to the inheritance theft. With the records we have, it's simple, but it could get complicated. I don't mind being messy, I said, crossing my arms. I've had enough of them stepping all over me. I gave my mother a call that night. I needed answers, whether she was complicit in this or just blindly trusting Brian. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Rebecca, she answered quickly, her tone still carrying the usual edge of annoyance. Are you calling to apologize? You know Brian is. Save it, I interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. I have some questions about Dad's inheritance, specifically about why Brian has been accessing my portion. There was a long pause on her end. What are you discussing? She finally asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Or was it guilt? I had a lawyer look into it, I said. For the past 5 years, Brian's been withdrawing money from my share. Thousands of dollars! Mom, did you know about this? Her hesitancy spoke volumes. Rebecca, it's not what you think, she said finally. Brian, he needed aid. He assured me he'd pay it back. My chest constricted, a mixture of rage and disbelief sweeping over me. You were aware? You knew he was taking from me, and you didn't say anything. I didn't believe that was stealing, she added defensively. It's family money? He was in a bad place, and I trusted him to handle it correctly. I laughed fiercely, responsibly. He's been blowing it on holidays and gadgets while I've been working myself to the bone. And you let it happen. Rebecca, please, she pleaded. You don't comprehend. Brian has been having difficulties. I assumed you'd manage without it. It's not for you to decide that. I lost my temper. You gave him the money as if it were nothing, even though I trusted you to keep it safe. How deceived do I feel at the moment, do you know? I was no longer able to listen to her arguments. We're done talking, I said icily. My lawyer will be speaking to you. A flash of awareness swept over me as I hung up. I had allowed them to control me and shame me into obedience for years. No more. It was more than just taking back what was rightfully mine. It was about defending myself at last. That phone call had immediate repercussions. My phone was flooded with missed calls and anxious texts from my mother the next morning. In the voicemails, she alternated between being defensive and pleading. You can't do this, Rebecca. Brian had no malicious intent. Then, let's simply get together and discuss this as a family. You don't have to hire solicitors. However, I didn't answer. I had a feeling of mastery. The money was no longer the only consideration. It was about establishing limits and letting them know that I would no longer be their doormat. Naturally, Brian adopted a different strategy. I discovered a fresh wave of posts directed at me when I checked Facebook later that day. She first declines to assist her own brother. She is now threatening to sue her family for financial reasons. Greedy, self-centered, and callous. When it comes to money, some individuals truly display their actual selves. My jaw tensed as I gazed at the message. The same group of facilitators from before expressed their uninvited thoughts in the comments section. She sounds terrible. No matter what, family should come first. You're better off without her, Brian. And without hesitation, I forwarded my lawyer a screenshot that I had taken. I had another meeting with him the next day. He responded, We're filing both cases. The lawsuit for slander is simple. Regarding the inheritance, we have ample proof that it was stolen. However, you must be ready. Your connection with your mother will become even more strained as a result of this. I leaned forward with a grim face. It's already too stressed to fix. Come on, let's do it. He gave a nod. Another stuff. Brian will have to explain where the money went if this gets to court. Are you prepared for that? It could become unsightly. Something in me paused. Was I curious about the extent of this betrayal? However, I then reflected on the years I had given up for a family that never showed gratitude for me. I'm prepared. I spoke aggressively. My mother gave me another call that night. I picked Rebecca up this time. Her voice wavered as she spoke. I spoke with Brian. He gave me some information on the funds. I had no idea it was so nasty. He told you what? With a harsh tone, I asked. Her quiet was quite telling. Finally, she muttered, I'm sorry. I had no idea how much he had taken. I ought to have prevented him. I allowed her to continue even though her comments sounded empty. I will speak with him once again. We'll work it out. Don't take this to court, please. I take a deep breath and close my eyes. Mom, it's out of my control now. You ought to have considered this years ago. I was relieved and angry at the same time as I hung up. Although it was much too late to reverse the harm, she was beginning to realize the reality. My lawyer phoned me a week later with an update that took me entirely by surprise. We had been looking over more financial documents. His tone was calm yet serious as he started. As it happens, Brian has been using more than simply your inheritance. Additionally, he has been abusing several of your mother's accounts. I went cold. What are you saying? It appears that he has been using money that your mother put up for her retirement. He clarified that we discovered regular withdrawals that followed the same pattern as the ones he took out of your inheritance. I was momentarily at a loss for words. In spite of his shortcomings, my mother had been unyielding in her defense of Brian, and now he had also stolen from her. Is she aware? Finally, I asked. Not just yet, he said. However, this information will be revealed if we move forward with both instances. My thoughts were racing when I hung up. Even though I felt bad for my mother for helping Brian, I felt sick to my stomach at the prospect of her losing her retirement funds. I gave her mother a call later that night. I started studying my voice. It will not be pleasant to hear what I have to tell you. What is it? Her voice was tired as she inquired. I described what the attorney had found. It was deafeningly quiet on her end. My money was stolen by him. At last, she uttered a tremulous murmur. I softened my tone and responded, "Yes, Mom. You deserve to know, even if I didn't want to. Brian has been robbing us both." She reacted with a mixture of astonishment and destruction. Her voice broke as she continued, "I can't believe this. I had faith in him. I had complete faith in him." "You ought not to have," I said softly. "You've been supporting him for years, even though I know you adore him. When there are no repercussions, this occurs." She started crying, and I felt pity for her for the first time, just as much as she had hurt me. She fell prey to Brian's self-centeredness as well. "Now, what should we do?" Through her tears, she inquired. We waited for the judicial proceedings to conclude. I spoke aggressively. "The money is no longer the only consideration here. It has to do with responsibility." The days that followed were stressful. I could feel the weight of the impending encounter bearing down on me as my lawyer submitted both cases. Although I knew it would be difficult, I also knew it was essential. I had let my mother and Brian use my generosity for years. However, I was defending myself this time. They needed to confront the repercussions of their behavior, regardless of the pain. The initial court date came sooner than I anticipated. As I sat in the courtroom, I had a mix of anxiety and excitement. For the years of entitlement, the thievery, and the way Brian portrayed me as the bad guy, I wanted justice. On the other hand, I was aware that this procedure would be unpleasant and bring the most sinister truths about our family to light. I became enraged at Brian's arrogant demeanor as he and my mother entered the courtroom. He dared to appear disinterested, as if this were just another annoyance in his life. But my mother seemed totally defeated. Her shoulders were stooped as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her, and she averted her eyes from mine. The attorney meticulously presented the evidence. Black and white screenshots of the social media posts, bank statements, and transaction details were displayed. Every time my attorney talked, I noticed Brian moving uneasily in his chair, and Brian's tone was appropriately contemplative when he finally spoke. His voice was brimming with fake sincerity as he continued, "I didn't mean for things to get this far. Well, I was having trouble. The only reason I took the money was because I believed I could repay it. However, Rebecca has no idea what it's like to be in need of assistance. She has always been well organized." As I heard his justifications, my jaw tightened. The gadgets, the evenings out, and the trips were not explained by struggling. And despite his best efforts to portray himself as the victim, the facts were clear. My mother paused and looked anxiously at Brian when the court asked her to testify. At last, her voice wavered as she spoke. "I had faith in Brian," she said. "I had assumed that he would handle the money sensibly, but I had no idea how much he had taken or what he was doing with it. I was unaware of how deeply he had wounded Rebecca. Although her remarks were painful, they also had a hint of responsibility. She was admitting reality. I won the case in court. In addition to being compelled to pay back the money he had stolen, Brian and my mother were had to publicly apologize online as part of the settlement of the defamation action. It wasn't a flawless triumph. I was aware that Brian would not be able to repay his debt for years. Furthermore, even if the apology was heartfelt, the harm they had caused was not undone. However, it was a beginning. Brian glared at me as we walked out of the courthouse. "I hope all is well with you." He spit. I answered calmly, looking him in the eye without flinching. My mother followed. She started crying. Rebecca said, "I don't know how to make this right. You begin by being truthful," I said, alongside me. "With Brian and with yourself, no more justifications." Slowly, she nodded. She had a sorrowful and guilty expression on her face. "I'll make an effort," she muttered. I sat in my flat that night and thought about all that had transpired. The struggle in court was ended, but the actual job was only getting started. Although I knew it would be difficult, I believed I had the strength to set limits with my family. Even though it was painful to see my mother and brother for who they truly were, I was relieved that I had at last defended myself. Life was strangely calm in the weeks after the court decision. My mother no longer bombarded me with texts and calls requesting that I help Brian or resolve their most recent problem. She appeared to have retreated as a result of the decision. Or perhaps she was simply too ashamed to approach me. However, the quiet didn't seem meaningless. It was peaceful. My phone rang one afternoon when I was at the kitchen table going over my invoices. My mother's name briefly displayed on the caller ID. I thought about leaving it on voicemail, but I had to answer for some reason. I said in a neutral tone, "Hello, Mom. Hello, Rebecca," she said a little hesitantly. "I've been considering every aspect of the bequest. The case in court. Brian." Uncertain of where this was headed, I waited. She went on. "At first, I didn't want to believe it, but I can't ignore the truth anymore. Regarding him, you were correct about me. I allowed him to take advantage of you and watched as he caused you pain. I'm so sorry." I wasn't prepared for how hard her remarks affected me. I had hoped for an apology like this for years. I wasn't sure how to feel, though, now that it was here. "I appreciate you expressing that." "Finally," I said. "Mom, it's not simply about saying sorry. The goal is to change. I've allowed you and Brian to treat me like I'm unimportant for years. That must end." She let out a sigh. "I am aware that I have been considering ways to improve. I just hope we can work things out before it's too late." I took a while to reply. "There is yet time." Eventually, I responded, "But it will take time." Brian, meantime, had been radio quiet. A part of me questioned whether he was planning retaliation. However, my attorney advised me that he could not financially retaliate because of the agreements. I knew better than to put my confidence in him, though. I was notified one day that Brian had made a post on Facebook. I opened it against my better judgment. I'm getting ready for more hate mail. Rather, I came upon a post that was very different from his typical tone. "I would like to express my regret to everyone I have harmed, particularly my sister Rebecca. I'm trying to make up for the mistakes I did that cannot be undone. I'm hoping she'll forgive me, but I know it will take time." I couldn't decide if I should laugh or cry. Was this only a show, or was he genuinely attempting to accept responsibility? In any case, I chose not to answer. I was not prepared to reopen that door. Not quite yet. I started to reconstruct my life in the months that followed. I pushed myself into my work, picked up some abandoned hobbies, and even began organizing a long overdue trip. My mother and I continued to have a functional but brittle relationship. She tried to give me a call once a week, not to berate me or make demands, but to find out how I was doing. Even though it was a tiny step, it felt important. Regarding Brian, I avoided him. He had been ordered by the court to repay the money he had stolen, but I knew I wouldn't see the majority of it for years. I was okay with that. I wasn't waiting for him to change his ways. The most important thing was that I had regained my authority. A few months later, I was enjoying a cup of tea while sitting on my balcony and seeing the distant twinkling city lights. For the first time in a long, long time, my family's incessant requests were not on my mind. Things have altered in my life that I never would have imagined. My shoulders were no longer burdened by the continual stress. Instead, I felt a calmness I was unaware I had. I had always believed that defending myself would entail losing my family and my sense of identity. Instead, it had provided me with what I had been looking for the entire time: calm. Although it was taking a while, my mom and I had started to mend our connection. She continued to give me a weekly call, usually to tell me about little things like her garden or a book she was reading. It seemed as though the burden of hidden expectations had finally been lifted from these discussions. Brian, on the other hand, kept his distance. I was grateful for the reparations, but I didn't rely on them, and his court-ordered payments came in irregularly. In actuality, I might have gone on without his money or apology. I had come to appreciate myself and learn to stand on my own, not because I was angry or spiteful, and it was sufficient. Thinking back on all that had transpired, I came to the conclusion that my family had not undergone the biggest transformation. I had it! I had been engaged in a vicious cycle for years of looking to those who simply appeared to take me for granted. for acceptance. I had gone above and above to provide for my family, putting my personal security and happiness at risk. However, defending myself, even when it was difficult, had led me down a different route. A tiny consolation was my mother's hesitant attempts to mend our connection. In her own way, she was attempting to put things right. But I still didn't have complete faith in her. There were hints of the mother I had imagined her to be, someone who valued me not only for what I could provide, but also for who I was. But Brian was another matter entirely. I wasn't prepared to let him back into my life, and his public apologies sounded insincere. I might be able to forgive him in the future. However, it was not that day. The most important thing was that I had learned to respect my own time and work and to set boundaries. There were times when I doubted myself, and it wasn't always easy. However, I now realized that it was always the appropriate thing to do to defend my value. I was quietly proud when I took a drink of my tea. Even if my family may not have changed entirely, I had, and that was sufficient. I had worked hard to gain this tranquility, and I wasn't going to let it go. Story 5, my mother remarked nonchalantly. We need $15,000 by Friday. All you are is a family ATM, she chuckled. Thus, I ended their ideal getaway and permanently left. I never imagined myself to be the one to abandon my family. I simply wasn't that kind of person. Everyone had always relied on me because I was trustworthy, accountable, and dependable, until I discovered I could no longer rely on them. My younger brother Benjamin called me innocently about textbooks he couldn't cover, and that's when it all began. My sister Claire and I had a sad conversation about her car breaking down and my mother requesting assistance with the energy bill, but only this one, Dad's brief absence from health insurance. Minor failures, I told myself. Family members watch out for one another. My career was off to a great start. Eventually, the startup where I worked as a software developer went public. Even though I wasn't wealthy, I was stable financially while others were still having trouble. It seemed appropriate to help them. I found meaning in being needed. I was unaware that the transition was taking place. I failed to recognize how critical problems become accepted responsibilities and how this once became every month. My savings account decreased, and I became less focused on my financial goals. However, I continued to concur. What was my option? They were my relatives. The demands became more intense, more often, more lavish. Claire needed money for her new place's first and last month's rent. After totaling his vehicle, Benjamin required assistance once more. Mom want a kitchen makeover. A timeshare offer that looked like a good value thrilled Dad. I put off my personal goals, took on weekend freelance work, and put in more hours, ensuring my own future, traveling, and purchasing a home. June then arrived, the point at when everything was altered. For years, I had been preparing to travel alone to Japan. My desire for a vacation was granted. I've booked my flights and reserved my lodging. I was scheduled to go in 3 days. Mom called. There was that familiar tremor in her voice, a forewarning of a request to come. I had a problem with the IRS, as did your father. We have till Friday to get $15,000. My stomach grew constricted. That covered almost all of my trip expenses and a sizable amount of the money I had been saving for a home. What took place? I inquired, fear creeping in. Oh, she answered casually. You know your father. This year, he believed he could do the taxes alone. Made a few mistakes. Her tone seemed strange, too polished, too informal for a crisis. This is serious. Could you please forward the notification to me? I might be able to assist in arranging a payment schedule. Then a harsh sigh, followed by silence. Haley, you don't have to repair things for us. You must pay it to us. I transferred the money, canceled my vacation, and told myself that this was only a temporary situation and that I would soon get my money back. I wasn't even thanked. My sister uploaded photos to the internet a week later. Mom and Dad at a Miami luxury resort. I'm holding cocktails, shopping bags made by high-end designer labels, raving in the captions about their unexpected family vacation and the greatest parents in the world. I phoned right away. Mom didn't pay attention to it. Dad did too. Claire did too. The fourth ring was eventually heard by Benjamin, who spoke impatiently. I could hear music in the background, laughter, a gathering. What is going on? Here, we're a little busy. My throat constricted. Are all of you in Miami? Yes, he said nonchalantly. We were taken on a surprise trip by our parents, completely last minute. This site is fantastic, it's crazy. My hands were shaking. You planned this when? I'm not sure. A month ago, perhaps. Something about a tax refund coming through, Mom said. Good fortune. Refund of taxes? No tax emergency. The call appeared to cease, or so I believed. He hadn't hung up correctly, though. Rustling laughter reached my ears. My mother's voice then became quite clear. In fact, Haley was duped by that tax tale. Incredibly so. A laugh. Manipulation of her has always been simple, Mom went on. Do you recall when she paid for Benjamin's urgent dental care? Another laugh. This one from Benjamin. Yeah, he laughed. That Xbox really took care of my teeth. What does it matter as long as she continues to pay the bills? Then came Dad's voice. If you just whine a bit, she'll take out her credit card, as usual, to Haley. The only thing we are is a cash machine. The soft clink of glasses was followed by Claire's voice. My chest constricted as I sat still. Like scavengers surrounding prey, their comments replayed in my head like a family ATM. Just a little whine. Why hadn't I seen it earlier? They continued talking without realizing that I could hear them discussing their next plan, deciding on a narrative to tell, choosing how much they would ask for. Everything sounded so natural, so usual. I hung up, turned off my phone, and waited in my apartment's darkness until the first rays of daylight came in through my windows. My phone was inundated with texts when I eventually turned it back on. Nobody brought up what I had heard. Simply put, greater demands. Please. More. Higher standards. Something changed within me, solidified into an indestructible substance. I refrained from confronting them right away, kept what I had discovered a secret. Rather, I devised a strategy. Initially, a financial expert was contacted. I went over each and every dime I had contributed over the previous 5 years. In some locations, the amount made my stomach turn, enough to purchase a house, and in others, many homes. I then looked for a therapist. I started dissecting the poisonous tendencies that had brought me to this point: the manipulation, the shame, and my ingrained need for approval. But I had one last task to complete before continuing. Something to make things right. I had been exhausted by them for years, deprived me of my dreams. Time I could never get back was stolen. My postponed trip to Japan was just the latest in a long line of dreams that have been dashed. I sent the identical message to each of them. I want to give the family a special treat now that I have some extra cash. A genuine getaway to compensate for the loss of Miami. They were so excited that they answered right away. There had been no inquiry as to the source of the funds for the following 2 weeks. I meticulously planned what they thought would be the ideal family vacation, a dream vacation at a prestigious Hawaiian resort, first-class airfare, special excursions, and every conceivable luxury. I searched the internet for the most luxurious lodging options in Maui, including oceanfront villas with stunning views, private beaches, individualized spa services, and gourmet meals cooked by a top chef. I emailed them pictures of their alleged suites, pictures of horizon extending luxury pools, details about cabanas where guests may enjoy beverages and the sunset. Dad texted right away. This is what I'm referring to now. At last, my daughter is contributing to the family in a meaningful way. Breathless with joy, Mom left a voicemail. I have to go shopping, she exclaimed. I have nothing fancy enough for a resort like that, clearly expecting me to pay for her new outfit as well. Claire started using social media right away. She tweeted, adding vacation hashtags and tropical emojis. When your sister finally steps up and does right by the family. Benjamin was direct in his statement. You ought to have done something for us by now, rather of using your money in such a self-centered manner. No gratitude at all, not even a shred of gratitude, only a guess, entitlement. As though they had every right to this lavish vacation. I urged them to bring their best clothes for an unforgettable trip and emailed them confirmation details and detailed schedules. I cultivated the expectation for weeks. I gave them something fresh to look forward to each day. A slick brochure for the exclusive tour to Helicopter Island. For whale viewing dinner reservations at restaurants with unachievable wait lists, I had saved information on a hired vessel. As they excitedly pondered what to bring, excited texts began to pour in. As they counted down the days on social media, they happily told their friends and neighbors about the lavish vacation they were planning. To make their trip even more memorable, they had upscale baggage monogrammed with their initials brought straight to their home. Everything had been set up with their comfort in mind. The message that went with it said, the reaction was instantaneous. So happy, so proud, and so resolute that this was exactly the sort of gesture they had always expected. It was all set up the night before they left. They packed their things neatly. There was a buzz of excitement in the air, and anticipation was at its height. They had bought new holiday clothes. Their internet profiles had already been changed with images with a tropical theme, and an expensive camera had been bought to record every unique occasion. The last message was then conveyed. All reservations have been canceled. The flights, the planned activities, the opulent lodging, the feeling of painstakingly preparing for something significant just to have it abruptly snatched away because someone else believed their wants were more important, was reflected in this sudden cancellation. The ideal analogy was the lengthy planned trip to Japan, which had been foregone in the name of an urgent financial problem. The final judgment was this. Unquestionable proof was included to the email. The exchange that had revealed all. Black and white footage captured them giggling, cunning manipulation, and careless plotting of future plots. The tape exposed the ease with which they had taken advantage of kindness. A flurry of incoming calls and messages started almost immediately. Their entitlement remained unchallenged. Their wrath was tangible, and their disbelief was apparent. The conduct was accused of being callous, self-centered, and needlessly brutal. Confusion mingled with outrage as they tried to make sense of what had happened. There was no responsibility, no apology. They were only outraged that they had been denied something they had taken for granted. Countless voicemails and missed calls had piled up by daylight, alternating between fervent entreaties and boiling fury. One email, however, stood out from the others. It was a straightforward, businesslike, and emotionless ultimatum. Unless the matter was resolved right away, complete. This legacy would ensure that not a single cent would be collected by passing on to others every asset, including the family house, treasures, and collectibles. This was presented as the last chance to make up for the alleged transgression and keep one's position in the family. However, this final effort at leverage was ineffective. They quickly created a legal instrument that formally gave up any claim to their estate. The whole sum that had been given over the previous 5 years was tallied in a thorough financial analysis. In other places, the amount was so astounding that it could be used to purchase many residences. Almost immediately, a response came in, warning of what was being irrevocably sacrificed and frantic assurances that this was an impetuous choice. However, the response was given without hesitation. A cycle of financial exploitation was being broken. Self-worth, freedom, and mental tranquility were being safeguarded, priceless items that cannot be replaced by inheritance. A different tactic was used by my mother, who insisted that I was ruining a lineage that had endured for centuries in a tearful letter full of passionate pleas about family custom. She forewarned me that I would later come to regret severing my deserved heritage. I decided not to respond. There was nothing left to talk about. Claire and Benjamin worked together. Alternating between insults and threats, they promised to refute any allegation I made in the future. As if their rejection was meant to be a punishment rather than a release, they vowed to spread false information about me and vowed that no one in our extended family would ever again acknowledge my existence. I changed my locks, asked my apartment building to bolster security, blocked them completely after their last communication, and prepared for whatever would happen next. I didn't anticipate how quickly they would get out of hand. My mother showed up to my place of employment the next day, creating a scene in the reception area. As she yelled about ungrateful children and that she wished she had never given birth to me, security had to pull her away. My bank issued a fraud notice after my father tried to access my bank accounts by feigning a family emergency. When that failed, he got in touch with my company and made unfounded claims about my mental health and my capacity to do my duties. Claire launched a full-scale social media assault, writing a lengthy and harsh post about egotistical siblings and alleged mental health problems. She uploaded sentimental family photos, tagged friends we had in common, and manipulated the narrative to portray me as a heartless and icy person. The most hostile was Benjamin. In the middle of the night, he showed up outside my apartment drunk, banging on my door and yelling threats that he would teach me a lesson in family loyalty. After I called the police, they escorted him out. I had applied for a restraining order by the following morning. The mayhem continued for weeks, then for months. Using therapy and the boundaries I was learning to establish, I bore it in silence. The majority of the extended family took sides with my parents, who had dominated the story for many years. The ones who were particularly good at portraying the injured, destitute victims. I lost relationships with aunts and uncles I used to know. I was removed from the digital lives of cousins with whom I had shared childhood memories. The truth was only revealed to my grandmother. From her retirement home, she called me. Her tone was firm but weak. She acknowledged that she had seen them treat me badly for years. How they drained me. How they demanded endlessly. She regretted not stepping in sooner, not standing up for me when I needed it most. Her words became a lifeline, a beacon of support when I felt most alone. Half a year after the Hawaii fiasco, their efforts to reach me gradually faded. A full year later, they stopped completely. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that they had simply redirected their tactics toward new victims, other relatives, old family, friends, anyone who might fall for their never-ending tales of financial hardship. Occasionally, my father's threat about the inheritance resurfaced in my thoughts. I'd been raised to believe it was my rightful future, a safety net, the culmination of generations of work. Walking away from it had not been an easy decision, but whenever doubt crept in, I reminded myself of what accepting that money would truly cost. Relentless manipulation, continued emotional blackmail, and a lifetime of servitude masked as family duty. No financial sum was worth that sacrifice. 2 years after cutting all ties, an official document arrived. Certified legal notice confirming what my father had promised. I had been permanently removed from their will. The family house, the assets and the heirlooms were all designated solely for Benjamin and Claire. I anticipated feeling something, perhaps loss, regret, or second thoughts, but instead I only experienced relief. The last connection had been severed. The final piece of control they held over me was now gone. I marked this moment by celebrating opening a special bottle of champagne that I had been saving for just such an occasion. I toasted to my newfound freedom 2 years after the incident in Miami. I finally made my way to Japan. The 2 weeks I spent there were far more restorative than I had expected. It was a place where no one knew me, where there were no expectations, where I could simply exist without justifying my presence. I could finally be myself. When I returned home, I began the journey of rebuilding my life step by step. I purchased a home not extravagant, but it was mine. Each nail I hammered, every brushstroke I painted, felt like an act of taking back control. I adopted a dog from the shelter, a scrappy mutt who, like me, had been abandoned by those who should have cared for him. Together, Molly and I healed, learning to trust again, to live in the present and to enjoy life once more. 3 years after cutting ties with my family, I received a letter from a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. She tracked me down, eager to reconnect. "I've left them too," she wrote. "It took me longer to see what you saw, but I finally came to the same conclusion." We met for coffee, sharing stories so alike. It was almost uncanny. The manipulation, the constant talking disguised as affection. "You inspired me," she said. "When you walked away, I thought if you could do it, maybe I could too." That night, I made a new entry in my special notebook, the one where I kept track of my life. After distancing myself from my family, under unexpected gifts, I wrote "Help someone else break free." 5 years after the incident in Hawaii, I got another email from my father. The subject line, "The Will." Despite myself, my heart skipped. I hesitated before opening it, wondering what fresh plan it may be. The message was basic. "Your grandfather's estate has been completed. Despite your treachery, there's a separate trust he put up years ago, particularly for you. Even I can't access it. The attorneys require your contact details to send you. What's yours? Reply with your address. I talked with my lawyer before answering, assuring that it wasn't another trap to bring me back into their hands. The trust was legitimate. It was a large sum my grandpa had set aside for me, irrespective of my parents' will. My father was correct. He couldn't touch it, couldn't stop me from claiming it, couldn't use it against me. I provided my data to the estate's solicitors and got the inheritance with mixed feelings. I was appreciative to my grandfather, who possibly had observed the family dynamics for what they actually were, many years before I did. Nevertheless, I was saddened by his passing and experienced a complicated uneasiness about embracing anything associated with my family. Ultimately, I gave half of the bequest to charities that aid others who have experienced emotional abuse. The remainder was deposited into a future-oriented fund to create a life that was genuinely mine, to save for retirement, and to complete the house I was remodeling. My father's email was the last time I spoke to any of them. Through shared acquaintances, I have heard tidbits of information. Mom continues to gripe about money even while she indulges in upscale things. Dad still acts as though his financial situation is better than it actually is. Without my support, Benjamin and Claire continue to switch professions and make excuses for why their relationship never works out. They have had to lower their expectations, cut back, and face a reality they were oblivious to while I was their safety net. I often wonder how their lives may have changed if I had established limits sooner, if I hadn't allowed their actions to continue for so long, if I had forced them to confront their financial situation before it got ingrained in them. But ultimately, I'm not accountable for it. It wasn't. Throughout this journey, they will never fully understand what went wrong, which is the toughest fact to swallow. Never acknowledge the damage they did to me or justify the suffering they imposed. I continue to be the antagonist in their narrative of events, the self-centered daughter who left her family and disconnected them when they most needed her, the one who wouldn't give them what they thought was theirs. I used to dream about the ideal conclusion. A genuine apology and a bittersweet reunion. The family is apologizing and acknowledging their errors. However, I've given up on that dream. Waiting for closure that could never be provided by those who were unable to provide it was another instance of self-harm. My internal acceptance and realization that their actions were never really about me allowed me to find closure. I was just the easiest resource to reach. They refused to give me the easiest route because I earned it. Since stealing was all they knew, they took. In order to break generational cycles, you must face painful realities about yourself and the people you care about. I once questioned my therapist about why I hadn't seen the pattern sooner and why I continued to give in spite of the mounting indications that something wasn't right. According to her, you were raised to feel that your value was based on what you could provide. They indoctrinated you to put their demands ahead of your own from an early age. Deeply ingrained and evolving is that conditioning. Reverting to previous habits requires tolerance, time, and unending self-compassion. This is not made simple by the world. In our society, martyrdom is praised, self-sacrifice is exalted, and genuine love is defined as giving until nothing is left. However, it is imperative to question that narrative. When you think that your worth is found in giving yourself up for other people, ask yourself, who benefits? My family is not like other families. I am aware that certain relationships are beneficial when there is reciprocal support and when supporting one another doesn't mean losing one's identity, when love isn't exchanged. If you are lucky enough to have such a family, love it, nurture it, and appreciate its rarity and value. And know that a different life is possible if your tale is similar to mine. A life in which connections provide vitality instead of weariness, where your needs are important and love is unconditional. What I can provide to others does not determine my value. It exists without regard to function, utility, or goal. Just because I exist, I am sufficient. You